The morning started the way most dangerous mornings do, quietly, with no sign at all of what was coming. My son Eli was 8 years old. He had this habit of running slightly ahead of me on trails, just far enough to feel independent, but close enough that I could still see the back of his orange jacket bobbing through the trees. We had been hiking together since he could walk. He knew how to step over roots, how to read mud, how to move through the forest without making too much noise. He was good at it, better than most kids his age. I had always been proud of that. I want you to hold that image, this small boy in an orange jacket, running lightly through morning light filtering down through oak and pine. Because what happened next changed the way I think about nature, about speed, about how fast a single second can split into before and after. We were in the Coto Doñana region, in the southwest of Spain, not far from where the Guadalquivir River fans out into marshland and scrub, before reaching the Atlantic. It is one of the most biodiverse corners of Europe. Red deer, lynx, imperial eagles, hundreds of migratory bird species, and wild boar, lots of wild boar. Sus stropha, the wild pig that has been roaming this continent for hundreds of thousands of years. An animal that most people picture as slow, muddy, almost comical. Those people have never seen one charge. If you are new here, and you have any interest in what nature can actually do to a human being when the rules change without warning, hit subscribe before we go any further. What I am about to tell you is the most honest account I can give of a day when everything I thought I understood about the outdoors turned out to be catastrophically incomplete. The boar was a sow. I want to be specific about that because it matters enormously. A lone boar, male, is dangerous enough. A sow with piglets is something else entirely. A sow with piglets is a creature that has collapsed the entire distance between fear and action. There is no warning phase. There is no sizing you up from a distance. The calculation is already complete before you ever knew there was a calculation happening. When a mother wild boar decides something is threatening her young, the gap between that decision and her body reaching 50 kilometers per hour is essentially zero. I had not seen the piglets. That is the first thing I need to tell you, because it explains everything about how badly I misread the situation in those first critical seconds. I had heard something in the scrub to my left, a heavy rustling, a low grunt, and I had done what I was trained to do as an outdoor guide. I stopped. I raised my hand back toward Eli to signal him to stop, and I turned slowly. In the training, this is always described as the correct response. Give the animal space. Do not run immediately, because running can trigger a chase response. Stay calm. Assess. The training assumed you were dealing with a single adult animal that had options. The training did not account for piglets hidden in the grass less than 4 meters from where I was standing. She came out of the scrub at an angle, all muscle and low center of gravity, her head dropped, her course set. She was somewhere between 80 and 100 kilograms. That might not sound like much until you factor in the speed, and the 2 curved lower canine teeth, the tusks, that had been honed against the upper canines her entire life, into instruments that could open a human femur. I ran. I am not ashamed of that. Every piece of correct information I had said do not run, but my body made the decision before my brain could overrule it, and I ran. I ran hard, diagonally, away from Eli and away from where I had last seen the piglets, because the instinct, the correct instinct as it turned out, was to draw her toward me and away from my son. I did not think this consciously. It simply happened. The ground was uneven, a mix of packed sandy earth and low scrub, and I was moving well. I could hear her behind me, the rhythm of her feet against the ground like a low drumming, and I could hear my own breathing, and beneath all of that I could hear Eli, who had stopped exactly where I had signaled, and was watching from about 15 meters back. And then she turned. I do not know if I disturbed another set of piglets further along my line of flight. I do not know if she made some assessment that Eli represented a more immediate threat because he was positioned closer to the main group. I do not know, and I have spent years turning that question over without arriving at a satisfying answer. What I know is that somewhere in the middle of my sprint, the drumming behind me changed angle, and when I looked back over my shoulder, she was no longer tracking me. She was heading for Eli. What happens to a parent's body in that moment is not something language was built to describe accurately. It is not fear in the way we normally use that word. It is more like a system reboot, a full sensory reset in which every previous priority is instantly and completely reordered. The tiredness in my legs from running vanished. The distance between me and my son, which was probably 12 meters, seemed to compress and expand simultaneously. I changed direction the way only adrenaline allows, without any of the mechanical awkwardness that comes from conscious decision-making, and I started sprinting back toward the line between the boar and Eli. A wild boar at full charge covers ground in a way that is genuinely shocking to witness. The body stays remarkably low and level. There is almost no vertical movement, no wasted energy, no bounce. It is pure forward propulsion, all of it directed at a single point. And the point she was directed at was my 8-year-old son standing in an orange jacket in a clearing in southwest Spain. Eli did exactly what I had drilled into him over years of outdoor trips when we had discussed animal encounters. He did not run. He made himself as large as possible, raising his arms, and he yelled, loudly. This is correct behavior for many large predators. For a wild boar protecting piglets, whether it is correct or not depends entirely on whether there is something more interesting or threatening, closer to the piglets than the child making himself large. I was trying to be that thing. I was screaming, waving my arms, angling my trajectory so that I would cut across the boar's path, not intersect with it. I want to be clear about this, but cross close enough to redirect her attention. It is strange what you notice. I noticed the quality of the light, the way it came through the canopy in thick shafts. I noticed a small lizard sunning itself on a pale rock to the right of the path, completely unaware of what was happening 2 meters away. I noticed that Eli's face was not panicked, it was concentrated. He was thinking. He was doing everything right, and he was 8 years old, and the animal heading toward him weighed roughly 12 times what he did. I hit the line. I cut across the boar's trajectory with about 3 meters to spare, and I made every sound I could make, and I threw the water bottle I had been carrying in my right hand directly at her. It hit her shoulder. It did not stop her, but it altered her path by perhaps 2 degrees. In the physics of a fast-moving charge, 2 degrees is not nothing. 2 degrees is the difference between directions. She passed between me and Eli, not charging either of us at full speed, but cutting through the space between us, close enough that I felt the air displacement, close enough that I could see the coarse dark hair along her spine raised in a ridge, close enough that Eli later said he could smell her. She crashed into the scrub on the far side of the clearing and was gone. Silence. Then the sound of piglets in the grass. Then silence again. I reached Eli in about 3 steps and I grabbed him and I held on. He was shaking. So was I. Both of our bodies were processing the aftermath of enormous adrenaline, which manifests not as trembling exactly, but as a kind of vibration, like a tuning fork struck against something hard and left to ring. We stood there for a long time before either of us said anything. What Eli finally said was, "I think she had babies." He was right. And that sentence from an 8-year-old boy, standing in the aftermath of one of the most frightening experiences of my life, contained more important information about wild animal behavior than most of the formal training I had received. Wild boar are not mysterious. They have not survived as a species for this long by being unpredictable. They are, in fact, almost entirely predictable once you understand the rules they operate by. The problem is that humans tend to approach wild animal encounters with a framework built around human social behavior, and wild animals do not operate within that framework at all. A sow with piglets is not assessing you as a social entity. She is not reading your body language in any complex way. She is running a single program, remove the threat, at any cost, right now. And anything within a certain radius of her young qualifies as a threat until proven otherwise. The European wild boar has been in these landscapes for a very long time. In Doñana alone, the population is substantial. Researchers tracking movement patterns across the reserve have found that boars cover enormous distances, sometimes 20 kilometers or more in a single night, moving between water sources, feeding areas, and wallowing grounds with a geographic precision that suggests detailed cognitive mapping of the terrain. They are intelligent animals in a way that most people do not anticipate. They solve problems. They remember locations. They have complex social structures, with female groups maintaining long-term bonds across multiple generations. A sounder, the collective term for a group of wild boar, typically consists of related females and their young. The adult males, outside of mating season, live separately, ranging alone or in small bachelor groups, and while they are also capable of serious violence, it is the females in a sounder that represent the most consistent danger to anyone moving through their territory without knowing it. A wild boar's tusk is not designed for display. In males, the tusks are more dramatic in size, curving dramatically upward, but it is the lower canines in females, shorter, constantly self-sharpening against the upper tusks, that do the real work in a fight. A charging boar typically slashes upward and then retreats, slashes, and retreats, inflicting deep lacerating wounds primarily to the lower legs and thighs. The femoral artery runs through that region. In remote woodland with no immediate medical access, a serious tusk wound can become life-threatening within minutes. This is not theoretical. Hunters across Europe, Asia, and North America are injured and occasionally killed by wild boar every year. In Spain alone, the number of hunting accidents involving wild boar runs into the hundreds annually. None of that was what I was thinking about in the clearing. But all of it came flooding back to me in the hours and days afterward, when I began to reconstruct what had happened, with the slow, analytical attention that is impossible during the event itself, but becomes almost compulsive afterward. Eli and I walked out of the forest quietly. We did not talk much. The trail back to where we had parked took about 40 minutes, and we moved through it with a different quality of attention than we had on the way in. Every rustle, every movement at the edge of vision, not with panic, but with respect, which is a different thing, and a better thing, and the thing that wild places actually deserve. I want to talk about speed, because speed is the thing that most people underestimate about wild boar, and it is the thing that changes all the calculations. A healthy adult wild boar can reach approximately 50 kilometers per hour. For brief reference, an elite human sprinter runs the 100 meters at about 37 kilometers per hour. An average fit adult, running hard, might reach 25 to 28 kilometers per hour over short distances. The gap between you and a charging boar, if it starts even 20 meters behind you on open ground, closes to nothing in less than 2 seconds. There is no scenario in which you outrun a wild boar on flat terrain. What you can do is change direction, because a boar at full speed has a large turning radius. What you can do is get off the ground, because boars do not climb. What you can do is put a substantial physical object between yourself and the animal. What you cannot do is outrun it. The vertical strategy is the one most consistently recommended by wildlife managers, and it is the one that would have been available to us that morning if there had been suitable trees nearby. The oaks in Doñana are extraordinary. Ancient, spreading trees with low branches accessible without equipment. But the clearing we were standing in was edged by younger growth, thinner trunks, higher first branches. I had assessed this in approximately 0 seconds while deciding to intercept the boar physically. That decision was not made from a place of bravery. It was made from a place of being a parent, which is a condition that removes the option of inaction completely. I have been a wilderness guide for 14 years. I have encountered brown bears in Scandinavia, a mountain lion in the American Southwest, a bull elephant that decided our vehicle was positioned incorrectly on a road in Botswana. Each of those encounters taught me something. The boar taught me more than all of them combined, and it taught me differently, because the boar was not threatening me. It was threatening my son, and that activated something that has no name in formal risk assessment training, something that sits beneath strategy and calculation and cool-headed response protocols, something ancient and uncontrollable, and as it turned out, functional. The ecology of the Doñana Reserve is worth understanding properly, because the wild boar does not exist in that landscape in isolation. It is embedded in a web of relationships so complex and so ancient that removing it would change everything. Wild boar are among the most significant ecological engineers in European woodland. Their rooting behavior, that habit of using the snout to excavate and overturn soil in search of bulbs, tubers, fungi, roots, and invertebrates, creates disturbance patterns across the forest floor that benefit dozens of other species. In areas of heavy boar activity, plant species diversity is measurably higher than in areas where boar are absent, because the constant turning of the soil creates fresh germination sites and disrupts the dominance of fast-growing, aggressive plant species that would otherwise shade out smaller competitors. The bare patches created by boar rooting are used by certain invertebrates as nesting and thermoregulation sites. The shallow depressions created by wallowing fill with water after rain and provide breeding habitat for amphibians. The dung of wild boar, deposited at rates that reflect their enormous dietary consumption, distributes seeds across the landscape. Oak regeneration in particular is heavily influenced by boar, because the boar consumes enormous quantities of acorns but buries caches of them as well, and not all of those caches are recovered. Trees grow from forgotten stores. The forest moves. In Doñana, the Iberian lynx and the wild boar exist in a relationship that is indirect but significant. The lynx's primary prey is the European rabbit, but the rabbit population is also influenced by boar behavior. The rooting affects vegetation structure, which affects rabbit grazing habitat, which affects rabbit density, which affects lynx hunting success. Pull any thread in a functional ecosystem, and you move 100 other things. The boar is a thread that runs through almost everything, and yet wild boar are also classified as a pest in large parts of their range. In agricultural areas bordering wildland, the rooting and foraging behavior that creates such biological richness in the forest becomes devastating in crop fields. Maize, potato, beet, wheat, boar can destroy a field overnight. The conflict between wild boar populations and farming communities is one of the oldest ongoing human-wildlife conflicts in Europe, and it is intensifying as boar populations expand into suburban and urban areas, pushed by a combination of habitat pressure, the removal of natural predators from many landscapes, hunting restrictions in some regions, and the boar's own extraordinary adaptability. Wild boar have been documented in the suburbs of Barcelona, Rome, Berlin, and Tokyo. They root up golf courses and municipal parks and garden beds. They are filmed walking through supermarket car parks at night in towns across southern France and northern Italy. They are not wilderness animals in the way that lynx or wolves are wilderness animals. They are everywhere animals, capable of existing in almost any landscape that provides food and cover. This adaptability is the product of millions of years of evolution in conditions that were almost never stable. The wild boar is one of the oldest large mammal lineages still extant on Earth. Its ancestors appear in the fossil record across Eurasia, stretching back to the Pliocene. It has survived climate transitions, habitat transformations, the arrival and departure of ice ages, the competition of animals that no longer exist. It is, in a very real sense, a survivor in the deepest meaning of that word, not lucky, but genuinely, fundamentally tough, able to live on an enormous range of foods, reproduce quickly under good conditions, adjust behavior to changing circumstances, and absorb population pressures that would collapse more specialized species. The global range of Susa scrofa, directly or through introduced populations, now covers more of the Earth's surface than virtually any other large wild mammal. They are present on every continent except Antarctica. In Australia, feral pigs descended from escaped domestic stock are considered one of the most destructive invasive species in the country, causing billions of dollars of agricultural damage annually and driving native species toward extinction through predation, competition, and habitat modification. In North America, escaped Eurasian wild boar have hybridized with feral domestic pigs to create what wildlife managers there call super pigs, animals that combine the size and aggression of the wild boar with the reproductive rate and cold tolerance of certain domestic breeds. They are spreading north into Canada with a persistence that has wildlife officials genuinely alarmed. An animal this successful does not stay in its lane. It never has. On the morning that the sow charged between me and my son, she was doing exactly what sows have been doing for millions of years. She was doing the one thing she was required to do above all other things. She was keeping her young alive. There was nothing malicious in it. There was nothing random. It was pure functional precision, the kind that only emerges from a lineage long enough to have truly solved the problem it was designed to solve. I found that, strangely, helpful. Not during. During was terror and adrenaline, and the particular anguish of watching danger accelerate toward your child, with nothing between them but the space you are trying to fill with your own body. But afterward, sitting outside the car with Eli while we drank water and neither of us was quite ready to drive, I found it helpful to understand that we had stepped into a logic that was older than us, more refined than us, and not ever, about us. Eli asked me later that evening, back at the small house where we were staying, whether I had been scared. I said yes. He asked me whether I would take him back to the forest. I said yes. He said good, and then he asked whether we could try to see her again, but from farther away. He wanted to count the piglets. That sentence, from an 8-year-old boy who had just had a fully grown wild boar pass within 2 meters of him, who had felt the air move and smelled the animal and held his nerve and done everything right, told me something about the nature of curiosity and fear that I am still trying to understand completely. They are not opposites. In that boy's mind, and perhaps in the minds of all people who are drawn toward wild things, they are the same current flowing in slightly different directions. We went back 3 days later. We went carefully, with more knowledge and more attention, and a proper pair of binoculars and a route that kept us upwind and at distance. We found the sounder. We think it was the same group, at the edge of a marshy area just after dawn. The light was extraordinary, low and amber, coming off the water through the reeds, and in it we could see 4 piglets, their striped coats making them look like something from a picture book, rooting in the soft earth while the sow stood at the edge of the group with her head up, reading the air. Eli counted 4. We stayed for a long time, watching from the high ground above the marsh, and nothing happened. The boar rooted and the piglets played and the herons stood motionless in the shallow water and the light slowly changed from amber to white, and it was one of the most beautiful mornings of my life. I keep returning to the question of what I should have done differently. It is a question that matters, not as self-punishment, but as a practical matter for anyone who spends time in landscapes where large wild animals live and move. The most important error I made that morning was not knowing where the piglets were. This sounds obvious in retrospect. It is less obvious in the moment, moving through dense scrub on an unmarked trail, with 1,000 other things to pay attention to. But the presence of young animals is the single factor that most dramatically alters the risk profile of almost any wildlife encounter. A cow elk in Yellowstone separated from her calf is more dangerous than a bull elk in rut. A female hippopotamus between you and the water is more dangerous than a territorial male on land. A lioness whose cubs are somewhere in the tall grass around you is operating in a state of alert that transforms the meaning of every piece of your behavior. The second thing I should have done is understood the terrain better before I ran. Running directly away from a wild boar, in a straight line, on open ground, is almost never the right choice. It is the choice I made because it was the choice my body made, and while the outcome in this case was not catastrophic, I can easily construct a version of those events where it was. The third thing, and this is the one that haunts me most, is that I should have known better than to have Eli in front of me. In terrain with known wild boar activity, particularly during the spring months when piglets are small and sows are most protective, a child positioned ahead of an adult means that if an animal emerges from cover, the child encounters it first. The adult's greater size and noise, the factors most likely to cause a boar to divert or reconsider, are behind the animal rather than in front of it. Eli should have been behind me. He should have been there the entire time. That I had allowed the habit of his familiar little figure running ahead to continue into that specific landscape on that specific morning is the thing I would most like to correct. I tell you all of this, not because I think you will find yourself in southwest Spain with a wild boar and an 8-year-old. I tell you because the principles apply everywhere that wild animals and humans share landscape. The adjustments in thinking are small. The consequences of making them or not making them are not. The natural world does not grade on a curve. It does not give partial credit for good intentions. A sow wild boar does not care that you are a wilderness guide with 14 years of experience. She does not care that you love the outdoors, that you have read about her species, that you respect her. She cares about one thing, and she pursues it with complete, uncomplicated, absolute commitment. There is something almost clarifying about that, once the fear subsides. A clarity that comes from encountering something utterly without ambiguity. In the weeks after we came home, I did a great deal of reading. I do this after every significant encounter, not to rationalize what happened, but to place it in context, to understand the animal more completely, to try to give the experience the intellectual weight it deserves, alongside its emotional weight. I learned that wild boar have a highly developed olfactory system, capable of detecting scents at distances that dwarf human comprehension. Their snout contains approximately 2,000 olfactory receptors, compared to the human count of around 300 to 400. They can locate food buried 30 centimeters underground. They can likely detect the hormonal signatures of stress and fear in other animals at significant range. When I was running, I was producing enormous quantities of the chemical markers of fear. The boar was receiving all of that information in real time. What she made of it, precisely, we cannot know. But she was not operating blind. I learned that wild boar have excellent hearing, with ears that rotate independently to triangulate sound sources, and that the low grunt I had heard in the scrub before I saw her was likely a contact call between the sow and her piglets, a communication that I had registered as a warning sign but had not correctly decoded. It was not a warning to me, it was a reassurance to them. The warning came approximately 3 seconds later and covered the distance between us at 50 kilometers per hour. I learned that the average litter size for European wild boar is between 4 and 6 piglets, with sows in good condition, sometimes producing up to 12. The piglets are born after a gestation of approximately 115 days and are striped for camouflage, losing the stripes at around 3 to 4 months of age. They stay with the mother for approximately a year before dispersal. The bonds within a sounder are maintained by the females across years, sometimes decades, and research has shown that related sows in the same sounder cooperate in raising young, with aunts and older sisters assisting with creche duties in a manner that closely parallels the cooperative breeding structures seen in elephants and cetaceans. An animal with this level of social complexity and investment in its young is not an animal that makes threats, it makes assessments. And if the assessment is that something is close to the young, the response follows immediately, completely, and without negotiation. That response is 5,000 years of hard history with humans, and yet the animal has not learned fear. In hunted populations, wild boar show behavioral adaptations, increased nocturnality, avoidance of open ground, heightened vigilance in known hunting areas, that indicate learning at the individual and possibly social level. But a sow with small piglets will charge a human regardless of that history, because the drive to protect the current litter overrides the drive to avoid the learned threat. The calculus for that specific animal in that specific moment defaults to the ancient program every time. I find this remarkable. I find it representative of something important about what wildness actually means. Wildness is not picturesque. It is not the beautiful stillness of a heron standing in amber morning light, though that is part of it. It is not the long-distance soaring of a raptor on a thermal, though that is part of it too. Wildness is, at its core, the complete subordination of behavior to function. It is an animal doing exactly what it must do, with no modification for your presence, your feelings, your expectations. When you enter a landscape where wild animals live and move freely, you are entering a world governed by laws that predate human consciousness, and those laws do not exempt you. I went into that clearing in Doñana carrying the assumption, formed over years of outdoor experience without serious incident, that I understood the landscape well enough to move through it safely. The landscape corrected that assumption in approximately 45 seconds. What I took away from those 45 seconds has made me, I believe, significantly better at what I do. More humble, more attentive, better at reading the signs that I glossed over that morning, the rooting disturbance in the earth near the trail edge, the fresh wallow just off to the left of where we had entered the tree line, the sequence of sounds that should have told me there were young animals nearby. Eli came away from it with something different, something that I think is rarer and possibly more valuable. He came away with the direct physical knowledge that wild animals are genuinely wild. Not in the abstract, educational, documentary sense, but in the bone-level, adrenaline-soaked, time-slows-down sense that only a real encounter provides. And he came away wanting to go back and count the piglets. That combination, respect earned through direct experience, paired with the desire to keep looking, is probably the closest thing to the correct relationship with the natural world that any human being can cultivate. It is not bravery. It is not recklessness. It is not the sanitized, distance-maintained appreciation of wildlife from behind glass. It is the actual thing, the complicated, occasionally terrifying, always instructive, actual thing. Eli is 12 now. He has been back to Doñana twice. The second time, we found a sounder of 11 individuals on the edge of the marsh at dusk, the low golden light catching the coarse fur along their backs, the sound of rooting coming soft and rhythmic out of the reeds.